The cold rain of December turned the seat of the square into a cold stone, while Sophia squeezed her 6-month belly, trying to protect the baby she carried. At the age of 24, this young Mexican immigrant never imagined that he was sleeping on the streets of Chicago, expelled from his own house by the in-laws who promised to welcome her after the tragedy. "Come back to your country, slut." It was the last words shouted by Morrison before throwing his few clothes on the sidewalk and locking the door. The reason? They found that Sophia had reported to the authorities the inhuman conditions of the factory where she worked illegally. For them, a pregnant Mexican who caused problems didn't even deserve the moldy basement he called the house. 3 days on the streets. 3 days eating remains found in the trash, washing the face in public toilets and feeling the baby moves less and less. With each contraction of hunger, Sophia whispered in Spanish, "Swarning, mi amor. Mama will find una manera." His hands trembled not only by the cold, but for the memory of Mr. Morrison's cruel words. "My son died because of you and this damn child who carries." David had died 4 months ago in a construction accident, leaving Sophia alone with a baby on her way, and in-laws who blamed her for distracting him at work. What began as a shared mourning quickly turned into hatred for the young woman who, she said, had stolen her son's last years. What she didn't know was that her hesitating steps on the main avenue were being observed. An elegant man with gray hair and impeccable suit accompanied her discreetly 2 hours ago. It was not piety what shone in her eyes. It was something she couldn't identify, but it made her feel strange, recognized. Thomas Whitmore, 58-year-old real estate tycoon, stopped the black Mercedes around the corner. For a moment that lasted an eternity, his eyes found Sophia's through the glass blurred by the rain. She looked down quickly, used to contempt, but something in his expression was different. There was a softness there, mixed with a determination she could not understand. "Sorry to bother," said Thomas, lowering the glass. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Sophia retreated instinctively, hugging her belly. Rich men who approached pregnant women on the streets rarely had good intentions, but there was something in his voice, a genuine kindness that made her hesitate. "Don't worry," he continued, noticing fear. "My name is Thomas Whitmore. I need to tell you something about her husband, David." Sophia's world stopped. How did this man know David? And why did your eyes shine with an intensity that mixed sadness and hope? "You have the same eyes of him," Thomas murmured, almost to himself. "And I know you're carrying your grandson." Sophia felt her legs weakened. Grandchild? But David had never mentioned family beyond the Morrison. As the rain continued to fall and 1,000 questions exploded in his mind, a truth was about to emerge. A truth that would not only change his life, but would reveal a family secret that would completely transform his understanding of who David really was, and why the Morrison hated her so much. If this story of overcoming and family secrets is touching your heart, be sure to subscribe to the channel to find out how a seemingly casual encounter would become the beginning of the biggest turnaround in Sophia's life. "Grandchild?" Sophia repeated the word as if it were in a foreign language. Her legs trembled and she leaned against the nearest light pole. Thomas left the car slowly, keeping his hands in sight not to scare her. "David never told me." Told? About her biological father? Sophia's mind was running in circles. David always said that he grew up orphaned, that the Morrison was the only relatives he had known. "You're lying," whispered, but something in Thomas's expression made her doubt her own words. "He had a birthmark on his shaped left shoulder," said Thomas calmly, "and a small scar on the right knee when he fell from his bike at the age of 7. Sophia felt the air escape her lungs. David had never told anyone about the scar, not even Morrison. "Do Morrison know who you are?" he asked with his embargoed voice. Thomas laughed bitterly. "Elizabeth Morrison is my ex-mart. When David was 10, she and her husband convinced me to give up the guard, claiming that a single man could not create a child properly. They promised that he would grow up knowing the truth." His fists closed. They never fulfilled their promise. As the rain continued, Thomas explained how he had tried contact several times over the years, always being prevented by Morrison. "When I learned that David had married, I hired a private investigator to find it. I found out about you two, and about the baby. So why only appears now?" The pain in Sophia's voice was sharp. "Because only yesterday I found that my son had been dead for 4 months. Thomas swallowed the cry. "And that you were on the streets." Sophia soothed the information slowly. "Elizabeth Morrison knew you were looking for David?" "I knew, and he did everything to stop our reunion. When David died, she saw a perfect opportunity to get rid of you too. He bet I would never find out about my grandson." The anger began to boil in Sophia's chest. The Morrison not only hated her, they had deliberately sabotaged the possibility of David to meet her biological father, and now they were willing to let Thomas's own grandson starve to death on the streets. "They told me that David had died of my fault," Sophia murmured. that I distracted you at work. Thomas shook his furious head. David died because the construction company where he worked was not following security rules. I had already started an investigation when I discovered his death. The Morrison knew it and feared the truth came out. Sophia felt a strong contraction and moaned in pain. Thomas immediately held her by the arm. "When was the last time you ate?" he asked, noting his extreme pallor. "The day before yesterday. I found some sandwich remains in the trash." Thomas felt a fury growing inside him. His pregnant daughter-in-law, carrying her first and only grandson, had been forced to eat trash as Morrison lived in her comfortable home, knowing exactly who he was and where to find him. "Elizabeth Morrison will pay for it," he said between teeth. "Every day of suffering that it has caused to you and my grandson will be charged with interest." Sophia watched him. There was something in Thomas's expression that went far beyond a grandfather's concern. It was the cold determination of someone who not only had the resources to seek justice, but also the experience to execute it as devastating as possible. During the last 4 months, while Sophia ate food remains and slept at square benches, Elizabeth Morrison had told everyone that the opportunist Mexican had finally disappeared. At church meetings, she sang dramatically about how some types of people couldn't overcome the loss and simply disappeared. He never mentioned that he had been herself to throw Sophia on the street. "They have something that belongs to me," continued Thomas, their eyes fixed on the horizon. "And I'm not just talking about you and the baby." Sophia frowned. "What else?" "David left a life insurance for $200,000. Elizabeth forged documents claiming that you had abandoned the country and got all the money." Sophia's blood fell. $200,000 that could have guaranteed the future of his son, stolen by the same woman who called her a slut and expelled her from home. Thomas took the phone out of his pocket. "My researcher has photos of Elizabeth spending the money in Miami last week. While you ate trash, she renewed the wardrobe." What the Morrison did not know was that they had just aroused the fury of a man who had built a real estate empire, being relentless with those who betrayed him. And now he found that they had stolen from him not just a son, but 4 precious months with his grandson still in his belly, and an amount that represented the child's future. While Sophia absorbed every shocking revelation about the true nature of the Morrison, Thomas already mentally formulated every step of justice that would be performed. Because men, but not only sought revenge, they served as a work of art, meticulously planned to make the most impact at the exact moment the target felt safer and more invincible. "Let's go home," said Thomas kindly, helping Sophia into Mercedes. "Your real home." During the route to the Whitmore mansion, Thomas called his personal assistant. "Margaret, I need to prepare the main guest room, and call Dr. Harrison. I need an obstetric consultation at home today." Sophia watched the city pass through the window, still processing the surreal turnaround of her life. "A few hours ago I was eating waste of garbage, and now I found it was daughter-in-law of one of the richest men of Chicago." Thomas said hesitantly, "If the Morrison knew about you, why did David never know the truth?" Thomas squeezed the steering wheel. "Because Elizabeth Morrison is a master in manipulation. When David turned 18 and legally could look for me, she invented that I had died in a plane crash in Europe. He even showed a fake obituary that he had sent." Sophia felt nausea, not from pregnancy, but of the magnitude of the cruelty of the Morrison. Whitmore Mansion was all Sophia imagined when David talked about really rich people, impeccable gardens, central source, and architecture that breathed ancient elegance. Thomas led her through the lined painting corridors to a spacious room overlooking the lake. "Rest a little," he said. "Margaret is already preparing something for you to eat. I need to do some calls." While Sophia took the first hot bath in days, Thomas was in his office articulating the first movement of what would be the most spectacular fall that the Morrison has ever witnessed. "Michael," said on the phone to his private investigator, "I want every bank transaction, every purchase, every Morrison movement in the last 6 months. And you got the recordings of Elizabeth's calls to the hospital when David died?" "I got everything, Mr. Whitmore. She literally told the employee that she didn't want distant relatives to be notified about the death. Her exact words were, 'Some people are better to leave in the past.'" Thomas smiled coldly. "Perfect. What about life insurance?" Elizabeth forged a power of attorney claiming that Sophia had returned to Mexico and authorized her to receive the benefits. "I have copies of counterfeit documents and the records that Sophia never left the country." 2 hours later, Dr. Harrison confirmed that both Sophia and the baby were well despite the malnutrition. "With proper care, she will recover completely," she assured her anxious grandfather. That night, while Sophia first slept in months in a comfortable bed, Thomas was in his office late, coordinating with a team of insurance fraud. "I want them to sue Elizabeth Morrison for falsifying documents, misappropriation, and unable to abandon it." instructed the city's most feared legal office, and do it so that the entire media of Chicago knows exactly what she did. Chief lawyer Robert Sterling, known for never losing a high-profile case, smiled. It will be a pleasure to destroy her reputation, Mr. Whitmore, but I have an even better suggestion. Continue. Elizabeth Morrison presents herself as leader of the local Christian community. How about if the first subpoena came during Sunday service in front of the entire congregation? Thomas laughed for the first time in months. Robert, you understand perfectly what poetic justice means. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Morrison slept quietly in her comfortable bed, completely oblivious to the forming hurricane. In the drawer of his dresser, hidden under expensive lingerie bought with David's insurance money, was a postcard of Miami, a memory of his recent deserved journey to overcome the mourning of the stepson's death. What Elizabeth did not know was that every photo she had posted on social networks during the trip, every expensive dinner, every brand of designer clothes, was being meticulously catalogued as evidence of her appropriation of the money for the future of the grandson she had sentenced to misery. Thomas closed the last document folder and looked out the window. In the guest room, a small light was still on, Sophia probably still assimilating everything she had discovered. In a few days it would be presented to society not like the opportunistic Mexican that Morrison painted, but like Sophia Whitmore, daughter-in-law of one of the city's most respected families. But before Sophia's complete redemption, something Thomas had been waiting for years, the opportunity to show Elizabeth Morrison that stealing from a Whitmore family was the most expensive mistake she could make, and the account would arrive with accumulated interest of 4 months of suffering imposed on an innocent pregnant woman. Sunday morning at the Oak Park Community Church, Elizabeth Morrison set the new hat, bought with David's insurance money, while greeting the faithful with her exemplary Christian smile. It was the perfect day for your presentation as a new leader of the charity committee. Dear brothers, Pastor Williams began, before the service I would like to announce our new social assistance coordinator, Sister Elizabeth Morrison, who has shown great generosity in difficult times. Elizabeth was proudly lifted, nodding gracefully to the 200 faithful present. What she did not see were the 2 men of suit who went discreetly through the back of the church. Elizabeth Morrison? Asked the bailiff, interrupting the applause. Her blood froze. Yes? You are being summoned by insurance fraud, document falsification and misappropriation. His voice echoed through the microphone still on. We have also arrest warrant for abandonment of an incapable of pregnant person. A sepulchral silence took over the church. Elizabeth felt her legs wobbly as she tried to process the words. There must be some mistake, he stammered, but his voice trembled visibly. The second officer opened a folder. You forged documents claiming that Sophia Whitmore had left the country, illegally appropriating $200,000 of life insurance? Whitmore? Elizabeth repeated the surname as if it were a cursed word. That's right. Sophia Whitmore, daughter-in-law of Thomas Whitmore, is alive and well cared for. We have your recordings at the hospital lying about her location and documents proving that she has never left the United States. The congregation began to murmur. Elizabeth Morrison, the woman who always boasted from her Christian morality, was being exposed as a thief in the middle of the pulpit. What's more, the official continued, loud enough for everyone to hear, we have evidence that you spent the money stolen on luxury trips while the real beneficiary slept on the streets, 6 months pregnant. Elizabeth looked desperately to her husband Robert, who had shrunk on the bench, trying to hide from the accusatory eyes of the neighbors. Please, she whispered, not here in front of everyone. This is exactly where it needs to be, said a familiar voice from the main entrance. Thomas Whitmore walked down the center corridor of the church, Sophia by her side, radiant, in an elegant dress that highlighted her pregnancy. The faithful turned around, immediately recognizing the most respected real estate tycoon in the city. Ladies and gentlemen, said Thomas, his laden voice, allow me to introduce my daughter-in-law Sophia Whitmore, widow of my son David, the same David that this woman claimed to be her foster son. Elizabeth felt the world turn. Thomas, you can't be here. You died. Thomas laughed bitterly. Another of his many lies, Elizabeth. David died without knowing that he had a living father because you invented my death to keep him away from me. Sophia stepped forward, her voice clear and firm. For 4 months I slept at square benches eating waste of garbage, carrying this woman's grandson, while she spent the money for my son's future on vacation in Miami. Pastor Williams was pale. Elizabeth, is that true? Elizabeth opened and closed her mouth like an out-of-water fish, unable to form a coherent response to 300 pairs of accusatory eyes. Thomas took an envelope from his pocket. I have copies here of all transactions, luxury trips, and Elizabeth's recordings lying to the hospital authorities about Sophia's whereabouts. You can't do this to me. Elizabeth finally managed to talk, her fully shattered holiness mask. "I can, and I'm doing," replied Thomas calmly. "Justice arrived, Elizabeth, and she arrived where you most valued your fake reputation." Robert Sterling, Thomas's lawyer, approached the pulpit with a pile of documents. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to clarify exactly what happened here. This woman not only stole the life insurance of a pregnant widow, but forged federal documents claiming that the beneficiary had left the country." He raised enlarged photographs. While Sophia Whitmore was hungry on the streets of Chicago, Elizabeth Morrison posted these photos in Miami, having dinner in restaurants that cost more than many families earn in a month. The erupt congregation in outraged murmurs. Some ladies who once admired Elizabeth began to move visibly away. "There is more," continued Sterling, his voice cutting the air like a blade. "Elizabeth also deliberately prevented David from knowing her biological father, lying about Thomas Whitmore's death to keep control over the boy." "This is a lie," he shouted, desperate Elizabeth, but her sharp voice only confirmed her guilt for everyone present. Thomas approached the microphone. "Elizabeth, you have turned the life of an innocent young woman into a hell, stole the future of my grandson, and deprived me of the last years of my son's life. All this while performing as an example of Christian virtue." Pastor Williams removed the microphone from Elizabeth's handy hands. "Sister Morrison, these accusations are very serious. If they are true, they are all true," said Thomas, delivering a folder to the pastor, "and there is enough evidence to send this woman to prison for several years." The police approached to make the arrest. Elizabeth Morrison, who had performed as a model of Christian virtue for years, was being handcuffed in the same pulpit where she preached about charity and compassion. While being taken by the church corridors, under the eyes of shock and disapproval of the whole community that respected it, Elizabeth finally understood that she had drastically underestimated the power of a man like Thomas Whitmore, and that stealing from her family would be the most expensive mistake of her whole life. But public humiliation in the church was just the beginning. Thomas had orchestrated something much bigger, and Elizabeth was about to find that when you move the wrong family, the consequences if and stendem far beyond a simple prison. 6 months later, Sophia was walking through the Whitmore Foundation corridors for immigrant women, her belly now housing a 9-month-old baby who kicked excitedly whenever she spoke in Spanish. The elegant building in downtown Chicago had been bought specifically to house women in situations similar to what she had lived. "Mama Sophia," called one of the inmates, a young Honduran pregnant with twins. Channel 7 reporter arrived for the interview. Sophia's life had turned completely. Not only had she become the foundation's executive director, but she was also pursuing right at Northwestern University, all funded by Thomas, who had discovered that her love for social justice was a trace inherited directly from David. Elizabeth Morrison, in turn, had been sentenced to 5 years in prison for insurance fraud and falsification of documents. Robert Morrison lost his job at school where he worked, and the couple had to sell the house to pay the attorney's fees. They now lived in a small apartment, avoided by the same community that once respected them. During the interview, the reporter asked Sophia about forgiveness. "Many people wonder if you managed to forgive the Morrison for what they did." Sophia caressed her belly, feeling the baby move. "Forgiving does not mean forgetting or accepting injustice. It means choosing not to let bitterness consume your life. Elizabeth Morrison has made her choices, and now lives with their consequences." Thomas watched from the door, proud of the strong woman her daughter-in-law had become. He had created a $20 million fund for the foundation, ensuring that no pregnant immigrant woman went through what Sophia went through. "But the real victory," continued Sophia, "went to see Elizabeth Morrison in prison. It was finding out that I have a family that loves me unconditionally, and finding my purpose helping other women who go through the same situation." In Women's State Arrest, Elizabeth attended the interview on the Ordinary Room television. His former church friends had stopped visiting her months ago, and Robert came less and less. She had lost everything: respect, money, freedom, and relationships. What most tormented her was not the bars or orange uniform, but the memory of the look of compassion that Sophia had directed her during the trial. Even after all he had suffered, Sophia had not shown hatred, just a deep sadness for the choice Elizabeth had made. 2 weeks later, Thomas Whitmore held his newborn grandson, David Thomas Whitmore, in the same hospital where his own son had died. The cycle had completed in a way that none of them could imagine 6 months ago. "He has his father's eyes," Sophia whispered, watching his passionate grandfather gently pack the baby. "And the mother's strength," replied Thomas, thrilled. "This boy will never know hunger, cold, or rejection, and when he grows up, he will know that he came from a lineage of people who do not bow to injustice." The Whitmore Foundation for Immigrant Women had helped more than 50 women in its first 6 months, offering not only shelter and food but also vocational courses, legal support, and psychological counseling. Sophia looked through the hospital window, seeing the city that almost killed her hungry and now hugged her as a heroine. Sometimes, I said to Thomas, what seems to be our greatest tragedy turns out to be our greatest disguised blessing. Elizabeth Morrison tried to destroy an innocent young woman for prejudice and greed, but ended up creating a powerful force for good that would impact thousands of lives. Sophia has learned that true revenge is not to return evil with evil, is to turn her pain into purpose, and to use her experience to prevent others from suffering the same. The best revenge against those who try to break us is to build something so beautiful and powerful that their wickedness becomes irrelevant in the face of our greatness. And have you already transformed your greatest pain into your greatest strength? Leave in the comments how you overcome your hardest moments. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that our resilience is always greater than the cruelty of others.